Good day, I'm Bill Humber, and welcome to another edition of The Green Citizen. Today I have with me Laura Robinson. Laura is a dedicated cycling advocate, a former competitive cyclist, a public educator in the realm of public health and environmental issues, a multitude of things. We're going to have a lot of fun talking with her today about some of those aspects of her past, her career, and some of her future endeavors. So Laura, why don't we start with talking about cycling and you, and how did you get involved in it? I mean, you probably grew up in an era when there weren't as many cyclists as today. Kids were always leery about roads and things of that sort. What drove you to become a cyclist, first of all, a competitive cyclist later, and today an advocate for cycling?
Well, I grew up in the 60s, actually, in Mississauga, which was then Cooksville for me. Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty small town, and every kid rode their bike to school. I had a girls' coaster bike that was handed down from my sister, of course. But one day when I was in grade 8, some of the boys in my class rode to my house. It was one of those perfect spring days, and they had 10 speeds, and it was the beginning of the sort of second wave of cycling in the 20th century. And I looked outside at night, and I just saw this long line of shiny bikes, right? And they looked so darn fast. And I was a runner, but I wasn't going to really be a runner. You know, I was always getting injured, etc. And I just saw speed when I looked out that window. I just thought, man, I got to get one of those bikes. And I remember asking my mom if I could get a 10-speed. And she said, well, your bike is perfectly fine. You know, if you want a bike, you better start saving your babysitting money up. So I did. And my brother, luckily, who's just 18 months younger than I am, started saving up his newspaper route money. And we had enough to buy, 2 total anchors of bikes in a few months from the hardware store. And my mom, my chain-smoking mother, said, why don't you kids join the Mississauga Cycling Club? And it was, yeah, why not? Like, why not? And so we started really riding. I remember we skipped school one day and we went for the 60K ride, and my mom found out and wasn't pleased. But, she knew her kids were doing something really healthy, although she did worry all her life about us on the road. But we did. We went out for the Mississauga Cycling Club time trial. And I remember we weren't maybe a kilometer or a kilometer and a half away from our house, and we got to a red light. And these 2 guys on real 10 speeds, one had a dog.
Not like your anchors.
Not like our anchors at all. And my brother knew the difference. I couldn't tell the difference then, but Angelo had a Peugeot PX10, and Dwayne had a Dodge Galaxy. These were good racing bikes.
Right.
And they were grown-ups. And we're stopped at that red light, and they look at us, and they said, are you 2 going to the time trial? And we said, yes. And then they said, well, let's all ride together. And that light turned green, and I went through that intersection, and it was like a door to a brand new world was opening up for me, and I was riding into that world. And it was exactly right. It was so, because we went up, we rode about 10 miles to get to the time trial, then we did a 10-mile time trial, and then we rode 10 miles home, right? So, and David was 12 and I was 14. So people who say kids can't ride far are wrong. They can. Secondly, though, I remember at the start, a time trial, someone goes off once a minute, and it was the president of the club, Eric Watson, a lovely man, holding the back of my saddle. And I said, I'm perched up on that bike, and I said, how do you do this? And he said, just put your head down and go like stink. So I did. And afterwards, we're sitting around on the grass, and he said to me, you had the fastest time for the junior boys.
Wow.
And I said, that's great. And then he said, you're a girl.
And that was a problem?
Well, it wasn't. I mean, they were surprised that I was a girl.
Right.
I wasn't, but and that was really interesting, because that brought that whole, and they were really wonderful. They were very non-sexist people. Like, my cycling club in Mississauga was just the best thing my brother and I could have possibly done at 12 and 14, because it did open the door to the world for us, and it was a wonderful world. But I did understand that people still imagined that only the male body really could go fast with speed and precision and ability. And of course we know that's not true. Many female bodies can do that. So I always had this weird relationship with cycling where I would say, 98% of the time when I was riding my bike, I was mistaken for a boy. And now there are more women riding, of course, and I'm older. I don't really think I look like a boy. I never did look like a boy, actually. And so now there's, we see lots of women on bikes, and I make a point of nodding or waving because I always want women to know that they belong on the road. And yeah, so that summer, it was the summer of '72. And I see it as the place where my brother and I, any kids at that age, 12 and 14, they're testing the waters, they're trying to be independent of their parents. And we were, because of our cycling club and because of cycling, we were able to go into that sort of adult world in a really fantastic way.
Now, what was the situation for women in cycling in those days? Were there as many opportunities competitively in championships, in the Olympic Games as there are today? Was it a different world than we experience today with cycling competitively?
It was an extremely different world. That was '72. Women cycling did not get into the Olympics until 1984. Only on the road, only the road race, not the time trial even on the road. And then '84 was the road. '88 they introduced one track event. And each Olympics they introduced one more event, but it was crazy sexist. I mean, the UCI, the Union Cycliste Internationale, is one of the leading chauvinist pig organizations of the world, along with the IOC, of course. And why, for instance, can men ride 4,000 meters in individual pursuit, but women can only ride 3,000 meters? Well, we can't ride 4K. I mean, that's ridiculous, and that's a socially constructed example of pure sexism. And so women were allowed in, but not really allowed in. And so it wasn't until London 2012 when there were the same amount of events for women at the Olympics as there were for men. And even then, the women's individual pursuit was still 3,000 meters, and the women's team pursuit, which they finally put in, the men had 4 men, 4,000 meters. The women have 3 women, 3,000 meters. Now, for 2016, we lobbied, myself and a number of women lobbied, and the UCI it's changing a lot now, because I think that they'll maybe get rid of Pat McQuaid, the president, who kept saying, oh, women have to wait. Well, I heard that in 1974, women have to wait. What, our entire life? Who I hope will be the new guy, Brian Cookson, from England, he said, I have 2 daughters. I interviewed him in London last year. I have 2 daughters, and women deserve to have equality. At the Rio Olympics in 2016, women will be riding 4,000 meters, and there will be 4 women on every team pursuit team, I'm happy to say.
Now you're not only and have been a competitive cyclist and a cycling advocate, but you're also a journalist.
Yes.
You're also an educator. So obviously you've had an opportunity to translate some of these observations into writing, into education itself. How important has that been as part of your advocacy work?
Actually, I think that that's been more important than anything I've done at the Olympic level, trying to make things better for women Olympic cyclists. Because again, like going back to my brothers and my experience as young people, that cycling club became our surrogate older brothers. So there weren't any really. There was one woman named Jeanette Jeanette Burtons in our cycling club, but women were few and far between. Not because women couldn't ride bikes, but because the world wasn't ready yet for women on bikes, unfortunately. So in order to pay those people back, and I feel so indebted to them for making my life so wonderful as a young person and making my brother's life so wonderful, I feel that I have an obligation to make sure that I do that for coming generations. And so in 1993, Chippewa-Nawash First Nation asked me, what could I do with children in cycling? And I said, well, let's do a bike safety day at the school. And wonderful friends who have a sports store sent up helmets and water bottles, and we talked about brain why it's important to keep your brain healthy, why it's important to keep hydrated, and we did a bike safety day. And that eventually became a cycling club and a racing team out of the elementary school there. And I still ride with the children up there. We cross-country ski now. Those kids are completely amazing. And I advocate on active and safe routes to school. And what's happening right now in the area I live in Bruce County, there are 2 First Nations. And that whole area used to all be their traditional lands, of course. And the children at Chippewa of Nawash, they have their school right on in their community, and they can ride to that school. But the children who live in Saugeen First Nation live right on a provincial highway and a county road. And so I've been trying to get the county to ensure that they have a safe route to school to ride their bikes or walk. It's about a 5K route. And the thing is, the county received Infrastructure Canada funding for that area, and the project was called the Lake Huron Shoreline Cycle Corridor. So they widened the highway and they put in a paved shoulder, but they didn't put any of the other cycling infrastructure that's necessary, like decreased speed limits, like bike sharrows, so people know this is a bike lane. It's actually not a parking spot.
Right.
Like cycling signs, you know, like signs that say children on road, you know, use caution, like a pedestrian activated stoplight so the children can cross a busy highway when they get to the town. None of that stuff is in there, even though if you look at what we describe a bike lane as in Ontario, it should have been. And so all children have the right to good health. All children have, you know, if you look at even the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, the, you know, the security of the person. And there's all kinds of studies that show that children are better academics when they get cardiovascular exercise before school and during school. Every argument says that we should do everything possible to facilitate safe routes to school for all children. And so right now I'm working against a county that really, you know, if you don't drive a pickup truck, you're persona non grata.
Talk about the public health component of cycling. You've mentioned that, and it also obviously has a significant environmental impact as well. And we see an epidemic of childhood obesity today. On the one hand, one might be very depressed that we're going in the opposite direction, but on the other hand, you know, the contradiction seems to be I see more people on the road cycling these days. What's happening out there? What's changed in the last 40 years since, you know, that you've been involved in cycling, for bad, but for good as well? And what do you see as some of the future prospects for improved access to cycling and more cycling?
Oh, things have changed so dramatically. I mean, there was a time when if someone was on a racing bike in Ontario, I knew who they were. Now, I mean, I haven't a clue who they are, you know, and so we see this huge influx of people getting really into that kind of high-end stuff, you know, and we call those guys mammals, right? The middle-aged men in Lycra.
Right.
And it's, you know, they're calling it, you know, cycling's the new golf and all that sort of stuff.
Well, that's not a bad thing necessarily.
I'd take it over golf any day.
Sure.
It's wonderful. I think those guys should learn, though, that you're supposed to be friendly. Like, I think, you know, why aren't you waving back to me? You're not going to the Tour de France next year. You're 55 years old. So I don't think that they have the friendliness necessarily. You know, if you were ever riding with Clara Hughes, she'd be waving to people.
Right.
And you know, if Clara Hughes, you know, how many multi-time Olympic medalists can wave to people, so can these CEOs who have discovered the carbon fiber bikes. Now, that's one strata of cycling. But there's a whole other strata, which is family cycling.
Right.
And cycling for transportation and cycling for, you know, recreation. And I've seen this unbelievable growth in it. And I think what has happened is people are starting to get the message about their health. You know, do you want to have a body that is really a difficult one to live in? I mean, our real home is our bodies.
Right.
And how well you take care of that home is very related to how well you feel, of course. And it feels so great to be on a bike. I mean, the wind's in your face, you know, and you're sweating and your heart's going, and you know, you're part of the whole wild world, right? Like, you're not sitting at a desk.
Right.
And you're a kid again. Like, every time you get on your bike, you're 16 again, which is such a great thing to be. I mean, who doesn't want to be 16?
Yeah.
So they feel that. People feel that, wow, I want to be 16. And I want my kids to feel that wonderfulness, that enchantedness of being. part of this big world, right? Where your sweat's becoming part of the earth, and you know, you're having this powerful relationship with the earth and the air and the water, and you're becoming dehydrated, and you're drinking, and then you're sweating, and then, you know, it's also cool, right? And I think at a very, very deep human level, people are profoundly moved when they ride a bicycle. And you can't get that way driving a car. I mean, you don't even notice anything driving a car. On a bike, you know, you smell that, like, I'm smelling the sweetness of the apples that are starting to even rot on the ground now, right? Like, you know, I'm smelling the leaves that are starting to fall, right? You do not get that in a car. And ultimately, I think we are animals, right? Animals with a consciousness, of course. And so it speaks to the animal that hasn't been allowed to live. So I think that's a big reason, and people are just loving it, right? And then they find out, it's healthy, it's really good for the environment, your body is part of the environment, and who needs a car? Like, who needs to drive somewhere when you can ride somewhere? And then, you know, the decision makers are getting part of it by changing and putting, like, real cycling structure, infrastructure in that facilitates safe cycling. People are not going to ride their bikes or allow their children to ride bikes if they think it's unsafe.
Yes, yes. Now, you also get to write about this. You've written a number of books. You've interviewed people of all ages for this. I know you and I have a mutual friend, Nora Young, who's in her 90s, who's been cycling, she competitively cycled in the 1930s, continued up through Masters Games. And so she is living proof that you can cycle virtually your entire lifetime. There is no real impediment to cycling in terms of the physical ability that we all have to do that in most cases.
Absolutely.
How would you reflect on that? You know, you must have reflected on that, knowing somebody like Nora.
Oh gosh,
in her 90s.
Nora Young.
Yeah.
What an incredible role model, of course, and inspiration. And you know, she shows us that there's such a history for women in sport, right? I mean, she wasn't just a great cyclist. She was a Canadian champion in cycling and in basketball and in hockey, you know, and in javelin. You know, I just think I was so blessed by ever meeting her and having her as a friend since the early 1980s. I remember when she came to our first cycling women's committee meeting at the Ontario Cycling Association, which was with all the other sports. This elderly lady with white hair came into the room, and she said, "Is this where the OCA meeting is?" And I thought she meant Ontario Curling Association. You know, I said, "Oh, do you want curling?" She said, "No, aren't the women bike racers meeting here?"
Yeah.
And that was my first lesson.
Put it all together, Laura. What does cycling mean? What has it meant for you? What does it mean for young and old people and middle-aged people today? Where do you see things going over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years? Are you optimistic? Or
I am optimistic.
Yeah, good.
I think we need to replace the decision makers who think you should take away bike lanes, as is the case in Toronto. And I think we need to work hard to make sure that the health and well-being of people is understood by our politicians. But it's going to come anyway. And I mean, like I said, those people must be replaced with people who care about human beings. But once people are on bikes, you know, they don't get off them again, right? Not once there is enough safe cycling infrastructure that they feel that they can ride from A to B reasonably. And once you have a critical mass, then it just grows, right? Like, you know, every time you're on College Street in Toronto, there's way more cyclists on that bike lane. And it seems to me that in many places like Montreal, Vancouver, parts of Toronto, that we've reached the critical mass and that we're never going to look backwards, and we cannot sustain this planet, if we can still sustain it at all, with a fossil fuel culture. I mean, we simply cannot do that. But the real thing is that what it makes you feel in your heart is so wonderful.
This has been brilliant. Thank you very much, Laura. And we will continue this conversation with more observations as we proceed in developing the concept of the green citizen in all of us. Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.